Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining this talk. I think this is the last talk in season two, and season three I think will be announced by Nikhil, which is going to be definitely more exciting. I'm not saying if season one and season two, everybody, all seasons have importance, but I think he's building up a nice tempo for season three now. Shashank, who's the speaker for the evening today, is a very dear friend of mine. In fact, I've been birding with him for last 15 years. Me and Ramki and him uh, have been to many places together, and we have some, very heated, discussions around conservation, cricket, sports, and many more things. Uh, I think what strikes me about Shashank is a couple of things. First of all, he's a trained biologist, by the way, right? I don't know how much you know about him. So he's graduated from one of the most premium institutes in the world, NCBS, in Bangalore. So he's a trained biologist. Uh, but I think what is very interesting about Shashank is the way he correlates uh, bird life or flora and fauna as well along with the ecology of the system. I think he has got a very uncanny sense, which I haven't seen in many people. You can study formally, but there is a sense which only few people develop, and I think he excels into that. And because of that, I think he has got many feathers on its cap, including discovering, a couple of species. And of course, he's doing a phenomenal work right now in Nicobar, which I will let him talk about that along with the stories. And I'm sure that there will be much more splits, new additions to Nicobar list. I think just to add the last bit of it, Shashank is not only an avid birder, but I think he's an avid movie watcher. He watches movies, in his quilt. I have seen him, in Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary, in his quilt, writes with his laptop and watching a movie. So he's a crazy sense of watching things. He's an avid cricketer. Talk to him, especially about Sachin. He's quite passionate about Sachin. And I remember one debate which me, Ramki, and he was having, who is more greater, Sachin or Dhoni in Tripura in some wildlife sanctuary. I can't even remember. And he is a very, I would say, accomplished herpologist. Not many people would know that facet of him. So any snake which comes into, in our colony, I send him across a picture and he will immediately identify and let me know. And then I basically, brag about it. This is a snake in my colony. So everybody thinks that, Atul has got very good sense of, snakes, but ultimately it's all Shashank's credit. So, Shashank, all over to you. We look forward to hearing, a lot of stories about Nicobar and a few from, other islands around Andaman and Nicobar.
Thanks, Atul. Thanks a lot for the very nice introduction. And let me share my screen with everyone. Okay. Can everyone see the screen, I guess? Then, Atul, the screen is visible, right? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can see
a
that.
thumbs up right now. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about just 4 different aspects or 4 different stories from Andaman and Nicobar. And I won't dwell onto the endemism. Like I will, of course, I will talk a few things about endemics and other things as well. But this is like mainly stories of, or let's say, kind of expeditions to see some of the species in Andaman and Nicobar, and something which we all like to do sometime or the like always whenever we are in the field. So let me start with the presentation here. So this is like just a photo from somewhere close to Little Nicobar. So whenever you think about Andaman Nicobar, you always think about blue seas, evergreen forest, and it's absolutely stunning. Whenever you go and anywhere you go in Andaman Nicobar, it's just spectacular when it comes to beauty of the place. So I'm going to start with the first uh, species. So I'm going to talk about Narcondam hornbill. We all know about legendary Narcondam Hornbill, which is there, and one tiny island. If you can see the cursor over here, is that it's right next to the northernmost tip of Andamans. So if you go towards northeast of Andamans, you can see a tiny island over here. That's a Narcondam Island, and one tiny island over here is a barren island. So it's a journey which, if one has to go get to Narcondam Hornbill, and I always like to say Narcondam Hornbill is stranded in time. It's mainly because it's been isolated from rest of the world for I don't know how many million years now, and that's how it's evolved into a distinct species. But and it's amazing. Like usually, what happens whenever there are tiny islands right next to a bigger island, it's as the distance increases, it's very difficult to colonize for birds to birds to colonize that particular island. So as Narcondam Island is so far away from Andamans, people like as a biologist will always expect species which are more common or the species which are present in Andamans should be present in Narcondam. But in this particular case, it's completely unique species to that particular island and is found nowhere else on the planet. So just to get to Narcondam Island, it's a pain. First, you have to get lots of permissions, and it's always important to get all permissions sorted before you get to the island. So you need to get permissions from Forest Department, you get permissions from Fisheries Department, from Indian Coast Guard, and eventually Indian and Andaman Nicobar Police as well, because that's the only accommodation which is available on that island. So what we did, we actually got all these permissions first, and then we started our travel all the way from Havelock Island, which is just east of South Andamans, and then off we went uh, in a boat, and it took us about 5 to 6 hours by speedboat to get there. And it's like endless sea. When you start venturing into towards Narcondam, you don't see literally a landmass anywhere inside unless and until when you go past Barren Island on the east. And Barren Island is India's only active volcano, as you all might know already. But that's something that's the only landmass which is visible on the way. Otherwise, in 360 degrees, wherever you look at is just sea, nothing else. And then you get to slightly ahead, you keep seeing things. So there you get to see dolphins, you get to see something like this wedge-tailed shearwater. There's lots of pelagics on the way. You get to see white-tailed tropic bird. You get to see streak shearwaters. And this is how you get to see Narcondam Island. So Narcondam Island is like a small bit of almost like a pyramid, which is jutting out of water. And as you can see from the shape itself, it's a dormant volcano. It's that volcano, basically the volcano which is right now not active. And just to get on to Narcondam Island or to land on Narcondam Island, it's a bit of a challenge because you can't really go and anchor your boat directly onto the island. You have to stop somewhere offshore, and then you have to put down the anchor, and then police usually turns up in this small boats called Geminis. And these orange colored small boat will come because police has to come and make sure that you are not from somewhere else and make sure that you are from, you have proper permits and everything to land on the island. So police usually turns up. You have to jump onto that from boat onto the Gemini boats, and then they take you to the shore. And before even you can actually get onto Gemini, you actually get to see Narcondam hornbills. So the Narcondam hornbills, so if you look at the genuses, all the species which are there in hornbill group, and this particular genus called as Rhyticelos. So the Rhyticelos is the genus which has the capacity to travel long distances. So for example, if you look at other Rhyticelos hornbills like plain-pouched hornbill, for example, or even our wreath hornbill, they actually are known to travel long distances. And the long distances in the sense they actually, so for example, every year, let's say somewhere around August, September is the time when you get to see plain-pouched hornbills in huge numbers in Peninsular Malaysia. And that's where so you can actually, so this genus in the hornbill has a capacity of actually moving from one place to other place. And that could be one of the reasons why this island was colonized by uh, this particular species, and probably the closest possible species or relative of the species is present all the way in Papua, West Papua. And there is so basically there is a huge, at least I can think of three barriers or at least two different barriers which are there in between Andamans and Blythe's Hornbill. So the closest relatives are so far apart from each other. And but anyway, coming back to the story, before you can jump onto the island or jump onto the boat itself, you get to see Narcondam hornbills flying around, and you get to see them very up close, literally up close and personal. They are like, so this one, it literally, I sometimes I had to like even move back from the hornbill to photograph it. It was that close. And just like our Reed's hornbill, you can see on the bill there are lots of lines. So just like other hornbills of this particular genus, every year one line gets added to their bill. So this is like an adult female. So the previous one was adult male, and I'll show you the better angle, I guess, in some time. And this is a juvenile or first year male. So in the first year male, you can see the neck is rufous. But at the same time, the bill does not have those many lines. It's just like a very fresh bird. And this is a first year female. It has slightly rufous color on the neck, but this rufous color disappears when they become adult. So in fact, it's one of those species where I actually say in the birds, and it's an exception because the females are more prettier than male, or maybe just a perception of mine, but that's what I always feel in this particular species. So they just like other hornbills. The hornbills are like they. One of my friends put them in the right, right words, that they are like they visit supermarkets. So the fig trees are like a supermarket, and Narcondam Island is filled with varieties of fruiting trees. And one of my very close friends who had worked on these hornbills, and in fact, what he found out that the Narcondam hornbill is one of the most. It has the highest densities of any hornbills in the world when it comes to per square kilometer. So first of all, the island itself is 6.8 square kilometers in the range, and among this 6.8 square kilometer island, you can actually see I don't know, maybe about 200 hornbills per square kilometer. I could be wrong, but somewhere in insane numbers you can see hornbills in the forest there. And this one quick question, you can actually drop in the answers in the chat. Can anyone identify this bird here? Let's see if let me open the chat here. Okay. Can anyone identify the bird and drop and write, just type the answer? Yeah. So if you look at this particular subspecies of Asian quail, it looks very weird, completely weird. And it was described by Ripley, I guess. And it's found only on Andaman Nicobar Island groups. You can see them all the way in Andaman and Nicobars and some part of Southeast Asia maybe, but mainly Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And they look completely different. So this is the second most abundant bird on Narcondam Island. The most common is, of course, hornbill. And of course, because they play a very important role to for seed dispersal. So hornbills, they need to have these. So the only way they can actually survive on that island is they need to have those many fruiting trees, and they are the seed dispersals also at the same time. But then there is always a competition by the seed predators. So the predators are the ones which feeds on seeds but they don't disperse seeds. Like for example, rats. And that's a one more thing which you will definitely see in the daytime, that the island is filled with rats. And those rats most likely are introduced by humans there by when ships landed there, but they are all over the place. And just like other frugivores, they are predating on the seeds but not dispersing the seeds as much. So this is a Asian koel on the island. Again, another frugivore there, which is common Maina. It's one of those Andaman birds. Then you get to see green imperial pigeons as well. Again, another frugivores. And another frugivore which is active on that island is the island flying foxes. They're all over the place. And the entire, wherever you camp, the place where you usually camp is around the police camp over there. And like I literally crashed there in my sleeping bags, and there is a nice bit of like there are wooden structures there. Either you can crash over there, or you can crash in temple there, or even with police guys over there. But this is a one mammal which is dominating the landscape and crawling. In fact, recently a shrew got Narcondam shrew got described from Narcondam Island. Uh, as we go ahead, let me see. Okay. And of course, there are other species as well, which I love a lot. This is a water monitor, another species of reptile which is very abundant. So that's the kind of pattern you will always see in Andaman and Nicobar. Certain species are extremely common. Like they are very common on the island, and especially reptiles, because they try and exploit the niches which are available. So, for example, in the island, not all species can from mainland can travel to island and colonize the island. There are always some certain niches are available. Like for example, in Andaman, if you look at birds, so there are not a single babbler available, right, or present there on the island. But so that niche has been exploited by Andaman Shama. So if you go to forest, Andaman Shama is all over the place, and you'll always find them in mid canopy as well as lower canopy. So mid canopy usually, if you go to mainland, Shamas are usually found in understory. But if you go to Andaman, you'll see them in mid-story as well, because that's the kind of uh, completely different niche they have exploited. Similarly, same thing with reptiles. There are not many species of reptiles which are present on the island, and they're known to exploit those niches. So this is again another species of skink there on Narcondam Island. This is again a huge Eutropa genus which is present on the island there. And again another species of something called as Cyrtodactylus, or if you look at, they're also called as bent-toed geckos. So if you look at their digits here, unlike the other geckos, which has a lamellase on their pads, these ones have just fingers. So Cyrtodactylus is now, some of the geckoellas are now Cyrtodactylus in mainland India. So this is another very common ground-dwelling gecko which is found in Andaman Islands. I think. And again, like one more thing which you might notice, and I think some of the biologists are still trying to figure out. And we go back to the first thing which I spoke about, where this Narcondam, how this Narcondam Anvil has reached Andaman or Narcondam Island to be more precise. So probably I think the nearest landmass is more than 250 kilometers away. So it's still a mystery. No one really knows the answer for this particular question yet. And maybe wildlife biologists or biogeography, people who study biogeography may be able to answer this question in the future. And then I go back to another set of islands altogether. So I'm going to go to all the way to Nicobar Islands. And I think I've spoken a little bit about Nicobar Megapod last time, but I think I might try and say a few different things, because every time you go to a place, you learn more about the species. You never stop learning about, even though you must have seen the species for the first time, or 100 times, or 1,000 times, you always get to know more about it. So first, I'll try and go a little faster here about how to get to Nicobar, because there are two ways of getting to Nicobar. One is get there in one option is you go in a helicopter, and when you go there in helicopter, you have to take a helicopter from Port Blair, which lands in Car Nicobar. And I guess, is everyone hear me? Everyone can hear me, right?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're good.
Sorry?
Yeah, we're all right.
Okay. No, because like someone I think pinged me on chat. And right now I can't see the chat here. But 1 second. Let me. Okay. So I think what I'll do, I will answer the question in all the questions in the end. So basically, what happens? You have to take a helicopter from Port Blair. The helicopter has well enough fuel to take off from Port Blair, get to Car Nicobar, which is the next. So there is a Great Nicobar, and there's Little Nicobar. There's Great South Andamans. Then there is Little Andamans. Then there is Car Nicobar, and the Central Nicobar Island groups. And as you go south, there is a Great Nicobar. So as you have to get to Great Nicobar, you have to actually take a helicopter from Port Blair. The helicopter has enough fuel to get to Car Nicobar and back to Port Blair, because that's how they operate. You need to have enough fuel to go there and come back. So as soon as the helicopter lands at Car Nicobar, it gets refueled there. Then you again take off from Car Nicobar. The helicopter has enough fuel just to get to Campbell Bay, which is in Great Nicobar, and enough fuel to come back to Car Nicobar. So as you get down at Great Nicobar or at Campbell Bay, the rotators are still going on, and you have to get off the helicopter, and the next passenger will get in, and the helicopter takes off from there and comes back to Car Nicobar, where it again gets refueled, and again it takes off from there with a new certain set of passengers from there and lands at Port Blair. So that's how it operates every day. Similarly, if you want to go there by ship, then you have to get to first Port Blair, wait for ship's schedule to be fixed. Then you get onto the ship, and ship may take about 30 hours to get from. It depends on if it's a direct ship with just one halt in between, or maybe it's an all port ship which stops at every island and then gets to Great Nicobar. And it takes about 30 odd hours just for ship to start from Port Blair and get to Campbell Bay. And it's always a challenge, because it's always fun to get around. So that's something which is so this is a photograph where helicopter took off from Car Nicobar. You can see the shadow of the helicopter in the background at the bottom, and that's Car Nicobar Island, which is like more or less converted into most of the Car Nicobar Island is now has coconut plantations and very few or very small patches of native landscape there. And this is how you get to see it. Like as you're flying over most of the islands, there is a rainforest right next to the sea, and it's absolutely stunning. So my very first trip to Great Nicobar, we had like this was way back in 2015, and no one really knew the call of Nicobar Megaport, and it was like a kind of a challenge, because the road was completed only till 25 or to 30 kilometers from Campbell Bay. And what we were told that the best place to see them is in Galathea Bay. So Vishnu and I went all the way to 30 kilometers, and then we started walking towards Galathea. And we encountered storms. The road was like a soup. So the picture on the left is how every time, this is like the place where the road was a little better, and I don't have to pull my shoes out from the 6-inch deep mud. But Vishnu and I had we braved the storm, got to Galathea, and but the landscape was stunning. This used to be the night on the clear days. It was absolutely amazing to go and stay there, see the blue seas right next to us, and in the night there's to be Milky Way right next to us. And this was our camp. So basically, that put together all. So this was a turtle camp, which Forest Department used to operate then. So there used to be some wooden cots, on which you actually not on cots. It's like wooden planks. On those planks, you actually put your sleeping bag and you crash. And there used to be plenty of sandflies. It was impossible to sleep in the night just because of those sandflies. And they used to get through with everything. They used to get through with from your get into sleeping bags. They used to get into your mosquito nets, and there's no way of stopping them. So both of us had so many bites that we had to actually take anti-allergic pill just to get over the allergic reaction from those insect bites there. And this is how the Nicobar megapod mounts looks like. So that's Vishnu right next to it, and the megapod mount is as tall as her chest. And this is like still one of the smaller mounts, not the bigger mounts here. So that was the first trip when we went there. We struggled to get to even close to Nicobar megapod. I had one brief sighting of a bird which I could identify later. Could have been the juvenile of megapod, but it wasn't a very satisfactory sighting. So I never counted the bird on my first trip. So off we went in my second trip. In that trip, I think when Atul was there, Garima was there, Gaurav was there, Alka was there, Manish was there. And this is how we actually landed to the Galatia Bay next time when we went. The forest department dropped us off directly to the offshore and the beach. This is actually when we're boarding. We're getting back onto the boat. But next time we were well prepared. It took us about just to get. We managed to get Nicobar megapod, I would say, quite easily. We had to sit in a hide there for some time, and we managed to see the bird. So the sighting was quite satisfactory. The camp was improved a bit. It was way better than the first time when we went there, and this is how we saw the megapod. Bit shy, but we were well hidden, so we got to see it quite nicely. And then I go back to last year when I was there. The whole campsite is now like this. 5 years down the line, so the road has reached all the way to Galatia, and it's going all the way to the southernmost tip of Nicobar. In a way, it's kind of sad that you can just drive up to a place, just walk for 250 meters, get to a place where there is a forest department camp looks like this now, and you can see Nicobar megapod right next to the island, to the camp. And unfortunately, as the Galatia Bay is now no longer a national park, it's denotified because the port which is going to come up right next to the okay, even though Galatia, I'm talking about all these megapods, Galatia is the stronghold for leatherback turtles breeding ground in South Asia. So little Andamans and Great Nicobar, and that too Galatia Bay especially. I think probably Galatia Bay has somewhere close to 70% of its all leatherback turtles nesting numbers in that particular area. Like the small area stretch which starts from Galatia Bay all the way to southernmost tip of Nicobar is a stronghold for this particular species. And now there will be a port which will come right there, and this is right at the nesting site of turtles, which is a sad message. So basically, it's denotified. The entire sanctuary has been denotified, Galatia National Park, which is a sad state in a way. Anyway, let's coming back to the story. We got to see leatherback turtles when we went there. And it's so sad, like this, just to see this prime habitat of this bird is gonna get converted into a port. And now this is how the camp is now. There is a proper wooden walkway, the toilets there, which never existed about 5 years back or 6 years back when we went there the first and second time. But as you go to, and it's much easier to see the bird. In a way, so let's a little bit talk about the biology of this bird. So it's very dynamic. So the one pair of Nicobar megapod will have multiple, I think maybe 1 or 2 mounts in their territory. They're highly territorial. So mounts are shared between the pairs as well. And sometimes up to about 6 or 7 different birds visit the same mound. So the mound is usually made up of all, it's a mud with inserted leaves. There are rotting material of leaves and all, which keeps the temperature, and Nicobar megapod maintains the temperature to somewhere in mid-30s, I guess, or something like that. And that's how the eggs are incubated on their own. So the pair will dig a tunnel into the mound. At the end of the tunnel, they will lay one egg. They'll cover up the entire tunnel with the mud and leaves. And because of the leaves temperature or rotting temperature of the leaves, it incubates the eggs on its own. And once the eggs hatch, the Nicobar megapod chicks can actually they dig themselves out of that tunnel, and they are precocial in the sense as soon as they come out, they're on their own, and they can actually feed on their own. They don't have to depend on their parents. And the pair's job of the nesting ends while maintaining the nest site, the mound, and laying the eggs, and that's it. That's the parental care gets over in Nicobar megapod soon after that. And one more thing, the biologists have observed that the pairs changes a lot, in the sense the same male and same female may change pair within the while they're breeding. So they're like, so in a single nesting season, let's say a male A and male B, and there's another, and then there's a female C and female D. The pair can actually change their mates very often, or they are known to change their pairs. I don't know how often they change, but they do. So even though I got to see Nicobar megapod like this on my recent visits, in fact, like some certain parts of little Nicobar, it was just the place where I was staying. I could see the bird from literally from 50 meters from my room. Eventually, in Great Nicobar itself, we found bird within half a kilometer distance from Campbell Bay. So, and then once you know, so that's what I'm saying, that once you familiarize with the bird, and when you see the bird, so a bird is always difficult when you get to see it for the first time. Once you know how to see the bird, it gets easier. And but even though you get to see bird multiple times, let's say in my last trip, like finally we figured out how to see Nicobar megapod. Like they became very, very, very easy. So even half a kilometer from Campbell Bay town, you can see Nicobar megapod. You don't have to go all the way to Galatia anymore. But anyway, but they are always around. And now I will go a little bit technical. This is what happened on my last trip to Nicobar. We added a new species of bird to India list. So before I get to that, I'll tell you something about the pale-legged leaf warbler. So there is a bird called as pale-legged leaf warbler, which is known from, I would say, 4 different sightings before 2015. So pale-legged leaf warbler was known from one collected specimen. I think I have a photo of that specimen on the left. So the one on the left is the collected specimen, which is collected by, I think it was Davison or Abbott. Abbott was, I think Dr. Abbott collected that specimen on a ship about 15 or 20 kilometers offshore of Great Nicobar. And it was identified as pale-legged leaf warbler. And then S.A. Hussain collected 3 more individuals from Markondam Island. It was published by, this record was published by Abdul Ali in, I think, 77's JBNHs. And those were the 4 sightings of pale-legged leaf warblers, which were known from India. So in 2015, it was in December, Atul and I were birding in Great Nicobar. And I still remember it was kind of a hilarious situation. I got to see, so we are birding in outskirts of GNBR, Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve in Great Nicobar. And I got to see pale-legged leaf warbler. And I was super excited because no one had seen that bird in India since it was collected from Narkondam. And I was like calling Atul that, come fast, I can see pale-legged leaf warbler. For some weird reason, Atul heard I was talking about pale-legged bush warbler. And he decided to stay put. He didn't come and see the bird that time. And I thought I saw pale-legged leaf warbler. Then between 2015 to 2020 now, or 2021, there are multiple sightings of pale-legged leaf warblers happened from Andamans. It was reported multiple times from South Andamans. I think someone has reported from Central Nicobar as well. And that's what happened for, that's what we all thought. until the time in 2021, while I was boarding there, I managed to record a call of a pale leg, what I thought was a pale leg leaf wobbler, which was this particular individual. And while I recorded a call, it sounded a little different than the usual pale leg leaf wobbler. So I came back and I shared this recording with James Eaton. And because I remembered that, so basically there is a bird called a Sakhalin leaf wobbler, which was split from pale leg leaf wobbler years ago. But no one really knew where this bird, or Sakhalin leaf wobblers, winters in the world. So till 2016, people had no idea about it, or 2015 or 2014 end. And that's the year when first sightings of some misnated Sakhalin leaf wobblers appeared from Thailand. Then they were reported from Singapore, so subsequently. And there they bird, even though if you catch a pale leg leaf wobbler and Sakhalin leaf wobbler in the hand, it's impossible to tell them apart unless you do a genetics test. So to collect a DNA test, then only you can figure out if it's Sakhalin or pale leg. Because the wing, lots of time in leaf wobbler identification, people use wing formula. So how long the wings are. But the thing is, there is so much overlap between pale leg leaf wobbler and Sakhalin leaf wobbler. It's impossible to, because of the overlap, it's impossible. The only other way, other than genetics, is to tell them apart is by listening to the call. So that's what happened, because we had recorded the calls and we recorded the calls of multiple individuals eventually, 2 individuals. We realized the calls of Sakhalin leaf wobbler were somewhere between 4.5 and 5. So basically that's how you tell them apart. If it's a pale leg leaf wobbler, the calls are much higher in node. So basically they are 5.5 and 6. So it should call somewhere here. So somewhere here is the place where you will hear. Will get when if you record a call and you put a sonogram, the only will tell, so you will see the sonogram where the calls are much higher pitched than the Sakhalin leaf wobbler. And then we realized that there is a recording on eBird, which turned out to be a Sakhalin leaf wobbler as well. So even though the recording was, I think, on 2018, it was reported as pale leg leaf wobbler. And then we went ahead and we plotted all those recordings from, so basically the one on the top left are the pale leg leaf wobbler recordings from the breeding ranges, which are confirmed birds, because both species, pale leg leaf wobbler breeds in the easternmost Russia and China, and Sakhalin leaf wobblers breeds on the islands of Japan. So these are the birds which are recorded from, Sakhalin leaf wobblers recorded from Japan, which are 100% Sakhalin leaf wobbler. These are the birds which are recorded from easternmost Russia or China, I think Russia, to be more precise. The one on the green ones, or the one in the second from the left, are the recordings from Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve, which we recorded. And then we also recorded certain individuals, one individual, and multiple recordings of these individuals did not fit with either Sakhalin or pale leg. So it's kind of still mystery. We don't know if it's what we saw, the other individual was actually a pale leg or Sakhalin. So we have left that unidentified as at the moment. The one on the right is the Sakhalin leaf wobbler, which was recorded from Andaman but identified as a pale leg leaf wobbler. So after all this drama, we have managed to identify the individual as a pale leg leaf wobbler. Oh, sorry, Sakhalin leaf wobbler. So we have managed to remove pale leg leaf wobbler from India list, and we added. So all the recordings, even including the individuals which are present or collected, we still don't know if they are Sakhalin leaf wobbler or pale leg leaf wobbler. So that's how it goes. And let's go to, and of course, as you are on Nicobar and Andaman, you see lots of reptiles and amphibians. So this is a species of lizard called as Bronchosella dallinieri. This is a male, which you can see slightly black and orange color behind the eye. And this male was actually moving a female. The female was slightly Uh, it's away. It's not there in the frame here, but it was looking at a female and displaying her his nice bright orange cheeks. Again, a common species in Great Nicobar. This particular gecko got its name just I think 2 years back or 1 year back. It's a dwarf gecko, a gecko which has completely round pupil. If you see all geckos, all of the geckos, they usually have vertical pupils. These ones have round pupils. Another species of geckos which don't have lamellae, they have fingers instead. A common species again on Great Nicobar Island. You have to look for them on the tree buttresses. That's where you can find them. And this one again, a gecko which got described just a few days back, or maybe about a month or two back. But two of my friends, Gokul and Chandramoli, described this species of gecko and a giant gecko. It's giant in the sense it's literally giant. It's this huge. You can hear them all the time while you are there on Great Nicobar Islands. So while you're Little Nicobar Islands, while you are walking around there, you can actually hear them in daytime as well. It's like a ping pong ball dropped onto a table. That's how it sounds like. The juveniles, especially the young ones, have the nice bright blue turquoise color eye. Extremely stunning looking eyes, and they can bite. Uh, but anyway, that's a different story altogether. So they are absolutely stunning looking geckos. And as you go around on Nicobar Islands, you get to see. Okay, this is another gecko. This is another bent-toed gecko from Nicobar, and this particular gecko is cleaning its eye. So what they do, they don't have eyelids, except I would say leopard gecko. They have eyelids, but this particular gecko, Ceratodactylus, they don't have eyelids. So most of the geckos, when they want to clean their eyes, they actually use their tongue. They pull out their tongue and they use it as like a wiper. So like the car wipers, they actually wipe their eyes with the help of their tongue. That's what this gecko was doing. Another bent-toed gecko from Great Nicobar Islands. Then these are tree-dwelling skinks. So they are again a very common species on Great Nicobar and Little Nicobar Islands. We saw them in plenty. Extremely common species where from coconut trees to in certain places, and even one skink was inhabiting one of our neighbors' terrace. One of my friend, he was like, if you go and sit on his terrace, this bold skink used to just walk around us, and it used to be a lot of fun to watch that skink move around a bit. This is a Nicobar bronzeback, a stunning looking diurnal snake. It was very funny. The very first time when I saw this snake, I spent about 45 minutes about just trying to get close to the snake because it was roosting higher up fast asleep on a tree. And I wanted to see the snake from close quarters. So I tried climbing the tree. I did lots of things for 45 minutes and I failed. Only to find this snake on middle of the road very next day in the morning. A stunning looking snake. They also, if you can see here in this photo, maybe I don't know, this next photo has it. Oh yeah, you can see it. You can see this nice blue color between the scales. It's actually an interscale color. And as the snakes have very long lungs, so one lung is much longer than the other, and maybe it's more than half their body length. You can see as they breathe in, you can see the blue color skin right over here and here. So basically the one lung of a snake can go all the way from here and it all the way goes beyond their mid body. So every time it inhales, it shows that blue interscale color. And when they breathe out, then actually the scales come closer and you can't see that color. And again, the diurnal species of snake, you can see the round eyes here. Very pretty, very fast, very agile, very difficult to even get close to one. It was fun to see this one close up. Another species which I've always wanted to see on Great Nicobar Island was a reticulated python. The only place in India where you can see them is Nicobar Islands. And this one was like a lot of fun to watch. I ended up seeing plenty of individuals eventually. Once I remember I was like walking around, look for nice outing session, and I went and sat on one of the culverts. And surprise, surprise, right next to the culvert is one reticulated python which had positioned itself very nicely over a water body. And there are lots of catfishes in that water body. I don't know if it was feeding on catfish. That would have been awesome sight to look at though. It didn't catch anything that night, but eventually we saw plenty of them on Great Nicobars. This is again some more angles of the bird, of the python. Very stunning looking, uh, and they are strong. They are very, very, very strong. The next one is okay. Some of the pit vipers. One crazy thing you will notice about Nicobars and Andamans, when the certain niches are available as just like birds, they also exploit them a lot. So if you go to Central Nicobar Islands, there are places in the forest. If you walk for 20 meters, you will be able to see a one pit viper. If you walk about 5 or 6 meters, you will see a lizard called as there are some lizards there which you'll see Corphophylax lizards which are everywhere. So this is like Atul and me when we were there on the island. We saw so many of pit vipers. We just to go out for owling, and you owl and go out, you get to see them everywhere. So this one is yawning right now. So whenever snakes eat a meal, they not more than yawn, they adjust their fangs. So this big sheath over here has covered its entire fang, and so vipers have movable fangs. So when they want to catch a prey, they open their mouth, the fangs come out, and that's how they deliver venom. So that's what this snake is doing. It's adjusting its jaw because the snake's jaw, even though our jaw opens like this, the reptile, especially snake's jaw, the upper jaw is fused. So it opens up the usual way. But the bottom jaw, it opens up like this as well. So it actually moves, so snake's jaw moves in 3 different directions. So one opens like this, the bottom jaw opens up like this. And that's how they can swallow prey, which is larger than their mouth size. Because the lower jaw is detachable and it goes out. So whenever the snakes feed like this, the very thing, the next thing they do, they adjust their jaw by yawning their jaw up and down. That's what the snake was doing. So the pit vipers are all over the place on Central Nicobar Island groups, or even Car Nicobar or elsewhere. So it's always fun to see them. And this is the one, the other lizard I spoke of, as mentioned about few minutes ago, is Corphophylax genus. And I'm not kidding. If you're walking in the night in the forest in Central Nicobar Island groups, or let's say Great Nicobar and Little Nicobar, not Great Nicobar. So it's very funny. It has reached Little Nicobar, but has never reached Great Nicobar Island. And you walk around on those islands, and they're literally there, like in a matter of 5 meters, you will see 4 or 5 individuals, or maybe even more. And it's insane. It's every step you will see some movement in the forest in the daytime. Oh, there's one more. You walk take another step. Oh, there are 2 more. You walk another step, and there are some 1 or 2 individuals more. And as you keep walking, you will see more and more and more individuals. Then I'll go back to snake again, and this is a snake called a sunbeam snake. So when you look at it like this, on the very first glance, what's a dull brown looking snake. And just hold on to that thought. Same snake, same individual, same angle, but you just change the direction of the light and the snake glitters. So this snake is called a sunbeam snake. So as the light plays its role, the snake glitters in a different ways. It's just bright, shiny, and it's just like, so I still remember the very first snake what to see. I could see just a small bit of coil in a leaf litter, and I was wondering, oh, that's a brown color snake. And my torch just moved, and it was just lit up, and I knew it was the sunbeam snake even before I could see the entire snake. So there are some more reptiles and amphibians, more reptiles on the island. And I would like to thank Delhi Birds, Nick, Ravi, and Atul, Manish, and Vishnu for some of the images. And I would like to end talk. I think I've finished on time though.
That was very nice. Thanks, Srijan. Ravi, you want to take questions? We'll open the chat box now for questions. So the chat box is now open. Anybody have any questions for Ishan? Please type it there.
I can see some questions here already. So, okay. So Ramit asked one question called as he asked question about Narcondam hornbill, no Narcondam coels. What brood parasites, brood parasites? Because all coels are brood parasites. So what these coels? Absolutely no idea what they do. That's something amazing, and that's the second most abundant bird there. So anyone else knows the answer? I would love to know the answer of this question. And it's amazing because I would always expect quails, they will lay eggs in. I've seen sunbirds there, so maybe that could be one of the brood parasites, but I don't know what they usually use there.
You want to stop sharing the screen, Sushant, so we can see your
I
face?
shall do that. Okay. Yeah, done. So the next question is. Interest, don't certain disposal and habitats. Yeah, it's like I would say more than in this particular case when I showed that turtle cam which got developed, like whatever, I wouldn't say developed, more than that, it changed from simple tarpaulin sheets to proper huts there. It's mainly because the availability of road. The road just reached to the southernmost tip of Nicobar, and that's what. So it's like a linear intrusions which happens. So if there is a forest, and in the forest if you build a road, there will be always linear intrusion in the sense if this is a forest and there are roads which cuts through the forest, there will be then intrusions which will happen on either side of the road. And that's exactly was the case which happened. So it's not because of birding interest the road was developed. The developed road was developed in a different unrelated case altogether, because there's a eventually if there will be a port there will be road, and that's exactly what is happening. Even the current state highway, which is barely two vehicles can move at the same time, is being widened. So yeah, that's something which is very disturbing. Oh, so basically someone asked a question about the building the hide. I actually carried my hide, which was a portable hide, which was not cut from the trees there, which we just set up on the spot, and we took the hide back once we are done. So we did not disturb the habitat there. Benefit of best season or time to visit Andaman and Nicobar Islands to cover majority of the bird species, including migratory species. Okay, so I would say get there in winter, especially in the month. Anytime, sometime like after between November to February is a good time. March it starts getting hotter and difficult to bird in the afternoons. Actually, it's a tropics. So whenever you bird on the islands in winter months, it gets difficult every now. I would say make sure that you're out there birding first light of the day, because only then you can maximize your birding. Because after 2 hours of morning, it will be scorching hot unless it's a cloudy day and it gets difficult to bird. So and birding is very easy. So maybe you might just require just 3 or 4 days to see all Andaman endemics. You may have to if you want to get to Nicobar, then you may have to account for certain number of days. So ship schedule plus 1.5 days to get there, 1.5 days to come back, and ship has to be there to get you there and bring you back. So you may have to account for additional good amount. So maybe don't keep a fixed schedule, just keep it flexible. Andaman, there are loads of places you can stay in Port Blair. You can see almost all endemics in and around Andamans. If you want to get to Nicobar, then the only way where you can stay right now is the government IVs. Those are, and you have to let them know. Usually, it's better to contact government officials well beforehand to book your accommodation there, which helps you with them. And then accommodation permission changes. So permissions are something which is very tricky. You have to, if you want to visit all Nicobar Islands, then you need to get something called tribal pass. And tribal pass is not very easy to get by. You need to have a valid reason why you want to get to Nicobar, other parts of Nicobar, because the native tribes there. So the Nicobaris and Chompins which lives in Nicobar and need to get your tribal pass sorted well beforehand you get there. So otherwise you won't be able to allow to land on any of the islands. Next question is, what about the breeding season for Nicobar megapod, and what is the best season to maximize sightings? So yeah, so maximum sightings, as I said, anytime between November and February is a good time. So Nicobar megapod breeds much longer. It's not like a fixed breeding season. Like they are much that, so they lay eggs almost throughout the year. But I would say again the winter time is good because that's a time there's a lot of activity in and around nests or mounds. I think I've already answered the question of how many days required. Then I think all tour operators nowadays they can arrange permits. There's a predatory pressure on the birds and animals on market. So among the predators, I can think of very few raptors there. I can think of white-bellied sea eagle. I've seen gray-faced buzzard there. I've seen some of the accipiters there, but not many predators on the island. So that is something which is amazing, like in a way. In fact, like Narcondam hornbill might be doing breeding season, I'm sure must be taking out some of the birds because all hornbills feed on. They are carnivores as well. Like they are omnivores, so they feed on fruits as well as other things. How much time it's always difficult. You have no, I have no idea. It takes a while, and you have to like follow it up multiple times. It's all red tape, so. What is the role of the iridescent scales? I have no idea. That's something because they are completely nocturnal, so I have no idea why the scales shine like this. How about the pelagic species? Yes, as I said earlier, you get to see lots of pelagic species. And I would say, like, once someone goes off from somewhere where the continental drop is there, people will see a lot more pelagics. And I would say one more thing is most of us visit Nicobars and Andamans in winter. So pelagic species, I think they might be much more easily visible. I would say in summer months, like the more or less. But I don't know. There are lots of pelagics which are there in Indonesian waters, which are right next door, which are where they are resident all the time. So some of them are at least. So yeah. Anything else anyone wants to ask? Can drop in the questions.
Thanks, Shashank. That was really fascinating. So all your insights on the islands, which I don't think many of us can ever really get to the islands and look them through your eyes. It's very, very fascinating. Thank you, Shashank.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. joining in for the last talk in season 2. And we should see you soon in season 3. Thank you. Thank you, Shan.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Bye.